Hi, my name's Dave. I'm a second year social sciences student at the University of Bath. We're now into the fourth day of Occupy Bath. We started here on Sunday. I've come down today and I'm hoping to be here for the rest of the week. And for me, the main thing is just to show it for people of Bath and anyone who wants to get involved to show their support and solidarity with what has already become the largest protest movement in human history. And you know, a lot of people are very confused, and there's a lot of disinformation in the media about what the Occupy movement is actually about. And it's one of the interesting things, and what I think has allowed it to grow so quickly and so successfully, and it's now appeared in over 2,000 cities around the world, is that it's more defined by what it's opposed to than what it's for. It's much more about opposition to the way things are structured in the world, the amount of power and influence that the financial industry have, that the banks have, particularly the private banks, the people who own the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve, and the amount of influence they have over government and government policy and their control of the monetary system. So there's, for me, a lot of concern about where we're going as a society, that we're increasingly being indebted. You know, students are now having to take on £9,000 a year tuition fees. We're living in the middle of a massive housing bubble. The resources of the world are increasingly being squandered and used up at exponential rates. And the underlying philosophy of the way that the market economy is built at the moment, that its growth is inherently good, which to me seems an inherently flawed way of looking at the world. What we need is sustainability and longevity rather than short-term profit. And there's a lot of anger as well at the banks and bailing out the banks, and none of the taxpayers were consulted before the government signed us into paying off vast amounts of debt for years to come. And just trying to keep the banking system going in its current capacity, you know, the fact that you have to bail it out shows that it's a fundamentally flawed system. And that we need to have a serious discussion and debate about how we're going to change the world, because if we keep going on the way we are, we're going to run into serious problems in the future. We're already living in a world where we have a completely fiat currency. It's not backed by gold or silver like it used to be, so we run the risk of destroying our economy through mismanagement, hyperinflation, and printing money out of thin air, which is what central banks in Europe and the United States and the UK have been doing. You know, a lot of people think that banks work by people who save money, put the money in the banks, and the banks loan that money out, and they have fractional reserving, so they can loan out a certain amount based on what's they've got in deposit. But that's very contracted. But that's not true of the central banks of you know, the likes of the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England. When they did when they did the bailout of the high street banks, so they did the quantitative easing, as they called it, they're actually literally printing money out of thin air. It's not backed by any material good. It's just being printed, pumped into the economy. And what the effect that has is it transfers economic and thus political power from the majority, from people like you and I, to the minority, the people who have a control over the banking sector and the money supply in Western economies. I'm into all sorts of music, actually. I've been a musician for about 12 years now. I'm a drummer, and I've played in all sorts of bands. I mainly sort of ended up doing a lot of rock and metal and things like that. But in terms of music I listen to pretty much anything. I listen to a lot of world music. Some of my favourite bands are bands like Pink Floyd, The Levellers, Led Zeppelin, Rage Against the Machine. I like some more sort of obscure things, like some sort of extreme metal, like